Ryan's chair scraped loudly across the hardwood floor. "Oh, come on, Lizzy," he said with a grin that never reached his eyes. "You always have to make everything difficult." "I just said I can't switch my weekend shift," I answered, trying to keep my voice calm. "One of my patients is recovering from surgery." Before I could take another breath, his hand slammed into my shoulder. The shove was so sudden that my feet slid out from under me. My face struck the sharp corner of the dining table with a crack that silenced the room. For one frozen second, nobody moved. Then warm blood poured down my forehead, into my eye, and onto the white tablecloth. The plates rattled to the floor. Ryan looked down at me and laughed. "There she goes," he said, shaking his head. "She can't even stay on her feet." I reached for the edge of a chair, my vision already blurring. Instead of helping me, my mother hurried toward Ryan. "Ryan, sit down," she whispered urgently. "Don't get upset." My father frowned, not at my bleeding face, but at me. "Lizzy," he snapped, "stop making a scene." Ryan pulled a paper napkin from the holder and tossed it onto the floor beside me. "Here," he said, "that should fix your dramatic little accident." As blood dripped onto the hardwood, I looked around the dining room. Not one person asked if I was okay. Not one person said Ryan had pushed me. And before the night was over, someone else would decide that what happened at that table wasn't an accident at all. I pressed the napkin against the cut above my eyebrow, while my younger cousins silently handed me my purse. Nobody stopped me as I walked out. Behind me, conversation slowly resumed. Forks clinked against plates. Someone turned the television back on. By the time I reached my car, I could still hear Ryan laughing through the open kitchen window. The drive home was only 15 minutes, but every streetlight sent sharp pain through my head. My left eye watered constantly, and the pounding behind my forehead grew worse with every mile. I cleaned the wound in my bathroom sink and stared at myself in the mirror. The cut was deeper than I'd first realized. A purple bruise was already spreading across the side of my face. My phone buzzed. It was my mother. "Please don't tell anyone what happened tonight." A second message followed almost immediately. "Your brother didn't mean it." Then another. "Families don't call the police over accidents." I set the phone face down without answering. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, the room spun. Around 3 in the morning, I stumbled into the hallway after nearly falling out of bed. The dizziness was worse now, and bright flashes of light appeared whenever I turned my head. When I called my parents to tell them I was going to the emergency room, my father sounded irritated. "You've already seen the cut," he said. "What are they going to do besides waste your time?" "I don't feel right." "You've always been sensitive." Then he lowered his voice. "If you start telling strangers Ryan attacked you, you'll tear this family apart." The line went dead. No one offered to drive me. No one checked on me. I drove myself to the emergency department just after sunrise. The triage nurse looked at my face, asked a few questions, and immediately sent me for imaging. Within an hour, I was sitting alone in a quiet examination room, gently pressing an ice pack against my swollen cheek, while the emergency physician reviewed my CT scan. At first, he looked almost routine. Then he leaned closer to the monitor. He zoomed in. His eyebrows narrowed. He opened another image. Then another. Several long moments passed without a word. Finally, he stood, picked up the chart, and walked out into the hallway. The exam room door didn't quite latch. Through the narrow opening, I watched him stop at the nurse's station. He picked up the phone. My stomach tightened as I heard him say, in a calm, deliberate voice, "I'd like to report a suspected assault." I was on my feet before I realized I had moved. "No," I said as the doctor stepped back into the room. "There has to be some mistake." He closed the door gently behind him. "There isn't." "My brother didn't." I stopped myself. "He pushed me, but it wasn't. I mean, My voice trailed off. The doctor pulled a chair closer, instead of remaining standing. Ms. Carter, he said quietly, I'm not here to tell you what happened. I'm here because your injuries don't match the explanation you've given us. I fell into a table. You did. I blinked. He continued carefully. But your scan suggests there's more than one injury we're looking at. Before I could ask what he meant, a nurse knocked softly and entered. The officers are on their way, she said. I stared at both of them. I never asked for police. The nurse's expression remained gentle. You didn't have to. While we waited, the doctor began asking questions that seemed strangely specific. Has anyone ever grabbed you hard enough to leave bruises? I immediately shook my head. No. He nodded without arguing. Has anyone ever pushed you before? No. Again, he simply made a note. Then he asked something different. When was the last time you broke a bone? I opened my mouth to answer automatically. I've never. The words caught in my throat. A memory surfaced. I was 19. Ryan had challenged me to race him down the back steps after a family barbecue. When I refused, he'd laughed, hooked his arm around my shoulders, and yanked me sideways. I'd landed awkwardly. The urgent care doctor called it a fractured wrist. Ryan had joked for weeks that I was too clumsy for stairs. I swallowed. There was my wrist. The doctor looked up. What happened? I fell. Even as I said it, the memory shifted. Had I fallen? Or had Ryan pulled me? The questions continued. What about your ribs? My ribs. Our records show you were treated for cracked ribs 6 years ago. I frowned. That camping trip. Ryan had shoved me into the side of a canoe while everyone was unloading equipment. I'd hit the metal rack. Dad had laughed. Boys will be boys, he'd said before correcting himself with a grin. And Ryan will always be Ryan. Everyone else had laughed too, including me. Because that was easier. The memories refused to stop. A sprained shoulder after Ryan thought it would be funny to spin me around in the driveway. A concussion after he threw a football much harder than he admitted. Deep bruises after he, accidentally, slammed a door while I was walking through it. Each event had its own explanation. Each explanation sounded reasonable by itself. Together, they didn't. The doctor watched my expression change. What are you remembering? I looked down at my trembling hands. I don't know anymore. You don't have to know everything today. His voice remained calm. But sometimes people become so accustomed to harmful behavior that it starts feeling normal. I closed my eyes. For years, I had defended Ryan before anyone even asked questions. I'd finished his excuses. I'd laughed at his jokes. I'd apologized for making him angry. Not because I believed I deserved it. Because everyone else seemed to. A gentle knock interrupted the silence. The nurse returned carrying a clipboard. We've requested your previous imaging studies from 2 other hospitals, she said. I looked up in confusion. You can do that. We already have. The doctor folded his hands. I'd like to compare every scan you've had over the last several years. My pulse quickened. You think this started before last night? He met my eyes with a look I couldn't read. Then he spoke the sentence that made the room suddenly feel much smaller. Your scan tells a much longer story than last night's injury. 2 uniformed police officers arrived less than 20 minutes later. They didn't rush into the room or begin asking accusations. One officer introduced herself while the other remained quietly near the door. I'm Officer Martinez, she said. Your doctor asked us to come because he has concerns about your injuries. We'd just like to understand what happened. I instinctively looked toward the hallway. My family doesn't know you're here, do they? Before she could answer, Voices echoed from the waiting area. They absolutely do now. Ryan. He sounded irritated, rather than worried. A second later, my mother's voice cut through the hallway. This is ridiculous. It was an accident. The officers exchanged a quick glance. We'll speak with them separately, Officer Martinez said. Within minutes, the waiting room had become the center of attention. Visitors looked up from magazines. A television played quietly in the corner, while nurses tried to keep the hallway clear. Ryan stood with his arms crossed, wearing the same smug smile he'd worn at the dinner table. There she is, he said as I was escorted into a nearby consultation room, feeling better after all the attention. Ryan, my mother whispered, touching his arm. Not now. He shrugged. I'm just saying the truth. She tripped. She always has. My father stepped forward. Officers, this is a misunderstanding. Our children argue like all siblings do. Officer Martinez held up a hand. We'll be speaking with everyone individually. Ryan laughed. Good, you'll hear exactly the same story from all of us. I noticed he looked directly at our parents as he said it. Neither of them objected. The interviews began. I answered questions in a small consultation room, while Ryan spoke with another detective down the hall. When I finished, Officer Martinez thanked me and stepped outside. The door remained slightly open. I couldn't hear every word, but Ryan's voice carried. I barely touched her. A pause. It was an accident. Another pause. I've never hurt my sister. Then Detective Harris asked a question that changed the tone completely. Mr. Carter, can you explain the fractured wrist from 12 years ago? The hallway fell silent. Ryan answered more slowly. She fell down some steps. What about the cracked ribs 6 years later? I don't remember. And the concussion. Ryan's confidence faded. I'd have to think about that. An hour later, Officer Martinez returned carrying a thin folder. We've started reviewing Ms. Carter's medical history. She opened it carefully. There are several emergency room visits over the past decade. I stared at the paperwork. I forgot about some of those. She nodded. That's not unusual. She continued turning pages. Fractured wrist. Another page. Cracked ribs. Another. Concussion. Another. Multiple soft tissue injuries. Each report listed a different explanation. Fall on stairs. Camping accident. Sports injury. Door accident. Yet one detail appeared over and over. Ryan Carter was identified as the only witness or the person who brought me in. Officer Martinez looked up. Did anyone ever ask whether you felt safe at home? I slowly shook my head. No. Outside the room, Ryan's voice rose again. This is insane. Detective Harris remained calm. We're simply comparing statements with documented injuries. My sister is clumsy. So you've said. And my parents can prove it. The detective glanced toward my parents. That's exactly why we'll be speaking with them separately. For the first time since I'd arrived at the hospital, Ryan looked uncertain. He turned toward our father, as if expecting immediate support. Instead, Dad avoided his eyes. Late that afternoon, a hospital employee entered carrying a large archive envelope. These are the requested records from the previous facilities, she said. Detective Harris opened the envelope and slowly removed several older reports and imaging records. He flipped through the pages without speaking. Then he stopped. His expression hardened. He handed one report to Officer Martinez. She read it once, then twice. Finally, Detective Harris looked toward the hallway and said in a quiet, unmistakably serious voice, "We need to reopen every one of these incidents." Detective Harris didn't return to Ryan's interview room. Instead, he carried the archive envelope into a conference room where 2 other investigators were already waiting. Through the narrow window in the door, I could see photographs, medical reports, and handwritten notes being spread across the table. Nothing about the situation felt routine anymore. Officer Martinez sat beside me. "They're building a timeline," she explained. "A timeline of what?" She answered carefully. "Every documented injury, you've had that required medical treatment." I stared through the glass. "I don't even remember all of them." "You don't have to," she said. "The records do." Over the next hour, small pieces of my past stopped looking like isolated memories and began fitting together. A detective placed enlarged copies of old family vacation photos beside emergency room reports. One picture showed me smiling at a lakeside picnic. Until they zoomed in. A dark bruise wrapped around my upper arm beneath the sleeve of my t-shirt. I had never noticed it before. Another photograph from Christmas showed a faint yellow bruise near my jaw. I'd forgotten it existed. Detective Harris pointed to the dates. These photographs were taken within days of the injuries documented here. Officer Martinez looked at me. "Do you remember what happened?" I closed my eyes. Ryan had laughed both times. He always laughed. The investigation widened beyond medical records. A detective returned after interviewing a woman who had lived next door to my parents years earlier. "She remembers frequent shouting," he reported. "Anything specific?" Detective Harris asked. "She says she'd often hear your brother yelling, followed by someone crying. Whenever she checked, your parents always told her everything was fine." My stomach tightened. I remembered that neighbor. She used to wave whenever I walked to school. She had asked me more than once if I was all right. I'd always smiled and said yes. By evening, one of my cousins arrived at the hospital after detectives contacted extended family. She looked nervous as she entered the consultation room. "Lizzy." "It's okay," I said quietly. She shook her head. "No, it isn't." She sat across from me, twisting her hands together. "I always thought something was wrong. You never said anything." "I was 16, she whispered. "Every time Ryan got angry, everyone acted like it was normal." She hesitated. "I saw him shove you into a wall during Uncle Ben's birthday party." I searched my memory. "I told everyone I'd slipped." "You did." Her eyes filled with tears. "But I watched him push you." Meanwhile, detectives continued interviewing Ryan. His confidence from earlier was gone. According to Officer Martinez, his explanations changed every time they revisited an old incident. The broken wrist had happened on the stairs. Then it happened while I was running. Then he couldn't remember. The camping injury had been an accident. Later, he claimed he wasn't even nearby. Every version contradicted another. Detective Harris simply kept making notes. "He keeps changing his story," Officer Martinez said. "People usually don't have to remember the truth. They only have to remember a lie." Then came the discovery that shifted the investigation again. A digital forensic investigator entered carrying printed screenshots from our family group chat. My mother had reluctantly surrendered her phone after detectives requested it. The investigator laid several pages on the table. One message, sent years earlier after my rib injury, read, "Ryan, don't tell anyone I pushed her. Just say she hit the canoe." Another followed seconds later. "Mom, everyone stick to the same story. She doesn't need more attention." Weeks after my concussion, another exchange appeared. "Dad, if anyone asks, she walked into the door." There were more. Far more. Each injury had its own explanation. Each explanation had been coordinated before anyone outside the family asked questions. Officer Martinez slowly closed the folder. "This isn't about one dinner anymore." I looked down at the pages. For years, I'd believed my memories were unreliable. Instead, everyone else's stories had been rehearsed. Detective Harris stood. The evidence now supports investigating a continuing pattern rather than a single event. As officers prepared to confront Ryan again, the conference room door opened. A forensic radiology specialist stepped inside carrying a finalized imaging report. The room fell completely silent. Every detective turned toward the report in his hands. The forensic radiology specialist placed the finalized report on the conference table. No one spoke while Detective Harris read the first page. He turned to the specialist. "I want to hear it from you." The specialist nodded. "The injury from last night's incident is consistent with striking the edge of a table after being pushed with significant force." My heart sank. But he wasn't finished. He pointed to several highlighted images. More importantly, these scans also show evidence of older healed fractures and prior blunt force injuries. They occurred at different times. They are not related to yesterday's incident. Detective Harris looked up. "In your professional opinion?" The specialist answered without hesitation. "The overall pattern is not consistent with a single accidental fall. It indicates repeated trauma over an extended period." The room became completely still. The CT scan hadn't simply explained what happened at dinner. It had exposed years that no one had wanted to see. Detectives spent the next several hours comparing every piece of evidence. Medical records, photographs, witness interviews, family text messages. Each one supported the next. The broken wrist, the cracked ribs, the concussion, the bruises hidden beneath sweaters and long sleeves. Every incident had been explained away differently. But together, they formed one continuous story. When Ryan was brought back in for another interview, Detective Harris laid the evidence across the table. "We've spoken with witnesses." Ryan folded his arms. "They're mistaken. We've reviewed your sister's medical history. She's always been clumsy. We've recovered family messages discussing how to explain her injuries." Ryan's expression changed. "I don't know what those are." Detective Harris slid one page closer. "Don't tell anyone I pushed her. Just say she hit the canoe." Ryan stared at the message. For several long seconds, he said nothing. Then he looked toward the observation window, where our parents were waiting in another room. For the first time in my life, he looked frightened. My parents were interviewed separately. Without Ryan beside them, their stories no longer matched. My father insisted he never actually saw most of the incidents. My mother admitted she often accepted Ryan's explanations because confronting him always led to explosive arguments. Detective Harris listened patiently. Finally, he asked one question. "When your daughter came to family dinners covered in bruises, why didn't you ask whether she was safe?" My mother covered her face with both hands. "I kept telling myself siblings fight." He nodded. "But this wasn't a fight." She didn't answer. She couldn't. That evening, detectives informed me they had enough evidence to move forward. Officer Martinez sat beside me in the consultation room. "You've been carrying this alone for a long time." I didn't even realize I was carrying it. She gave a small, understanding smile. "That's more common than people think." A few minutes later, I watched through the hallway window as officers approached Ryan. One detective calmly informed him he was under arrest in connection with multiple assaults, including the incident from the previous evening. The confidence that had carried him through family dinners, holidays, and years of excuses disappeared. He looked toward our parents. Neither of them moved. No one defended him. No one called it an accident. The laughter that had echoed through the dining room the night before was gone. The investigation continued over the following months. Witnesses who had once stayed silent came forward. My cousin provided a statement about the birthday party, where she'd seen Ryan shove me into a wall. The former neighbor described years of shouting, followed by suspicious explanations. Medical experts explained how the documented injuries fit a repeated pattern rather than isolated accidents. Ryan's attorney challenged every allegation. But the evidence no longer depended on a single memory. It came from hospital records, photographs, digital messages, independent witnesses. The pattern spoke for itself. The fallout reached far beyond the courtroom. Relatives who had always believed I was accident-prone began calling to apologize. Several admitted they had noticed things over the years, but accepted the explanations because everyone else had. Family gatherings stopped. The traditions that had once seemed so important dissolved almost overnight. My parents struggled with the realization that protecting one child had cost them the trust of the other. They asked to meet. I agreed once. My mother cried through most of the conversation. I thought keeping the family together was the right thing. I looked at her quietly. You kept the appearance of a family together. She lowered her eyes. But you left me alone. There wasn't anything else to say. Recovery wasn't immediate. The cut above my eyebrow healed into a thin scar. The headaches faded. Therapy helped me recognize something I'd never understood before. Peace isn't the same as silence. For years, I'd confused the two. I'd believed avoiding conflict made me kind. In reality, it had taught me to accept treatment no one should accept. Little by little, that changed. I stopped answering calls demanding forgiveness before accountability. I built friendships with people who didn't expect me to apologize for someone else's actions. I spent holidays with people who asked whether I was happy instead of whether I was keeping everyone else comfortable. For the first time, home felt safe because it was built on honesty instead of denial. Sometimes I still catch myself touching the faint scar near my eyebrow. It reminds me of one terrible night. But it also reminds me of the morning after. A morning when one emergency room doctor looked beyond a single injury, trusted what the evidence showed, and refused to dismiss it as just an accident. Looking back, I understand something I couldn't see then. The doctor didn't destroy my family that morning. The CT scan simply revealed the truth they had spent years trying to hide.